The house smelled of lavender and old wood, a scent that had woven itself into my life over the past decade. Every morning, I'd walk through the creaky front door of Evelyn's home, my mother-in-law, and feel the weight of her world settle onto my shoulders. It wasn't just the physical tasks helping her out of bed, preparing her meals, or sorting her endless medication set was the quiet burden of being her only constant in a life that had grown smaller with each passing year. Evelyn was 82 when I first started caring for her. Her husband had passed years before, and her two children, Mark and Clara, lived states away, their visits rare and fleeting. I didn't mind at first. My husband, Tom, Evelyn's only son, had died in a car accident 5 years into our marriage, and caring for his mother felt like a way to keep him close. I'd promised him I'd look after her, and I meant it. But promises, I learned, have a way of stretching you thin. Evelyn wasn't the easiest person to care for. Her mind was sharp, but her body betrayed her daily. Arthritis twisted her hands into knots, and her heart condition demanded constant vigilance. Yet, she had a fire in Hera's stubborn pride that refused to let her seem weak. "Don't fuss over me, Laura," she'd say, her voice crisp despite the tremble in her hands. But I fussed anyway. I cooked her favorite chicken noodle soup, read her old romance novels aloud when her eyes grew too weak, and sat with her through long afternoons filled with stories of her youth. Her house, a modest 2-story in a quiet Ohio suburb, was a time capsule. Faded wallpaper peeled at the edges, and every shelf held relics of a life well lived, photos of Tom as a boy, crystal vases from her wedding, and a collection of porcelain figurines she dusted religiously. I grew to love that house, not for its charm, but for what it meant to her. It was her sanctuary, and I was its keeper. Mark and Clara, however, saw it differently. To them, the house was a vault of potential wealth, a ticking clock until their inheritance. They called occasionally, their voices polite but distant, asking about Evelyn's health as if checking a box. "She's doing okay," I'd say, shielding them from the truth of her worsening condition. They didn't need to know how she cried at night, missing Tom, or how she'd stare out the window, waiting for a car that never came. One spring morning, as I helped Evelyn into her favorite armchair, she grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Laura," she said, her blue eyes piercing, "you're too good to me. Don't let them take that from you." I didn't know what she meant then, but her words stuck, a quiet warning I couldn't shake. The years blurred together, each day a repetition of care and quiet moments. I'd leave my own small apartment each morning, drive the 10 miles to Evelyn's house, and lose myself in her world. My own life friends, hobbies, dreams faded into the background. I didn't resent it. Not really. But there were moments, late at night, when I'd wonder what my life might have been if Tom were still alive, if I hadn't taken on this role. By Evelyn's 90th birthday, her health had declined sharply. She could barely walk, and her heart medication wasn't working as well as it used to. I hired a part-time nurse, dipping into my savings to cover the cost. Mark and Clara didn't offer to help. Instead, they started asking questions about the house, its value, its condition, whether it was time to sell. I brushed them off, focusing on Evelyn. But their calls grew more frequent, their tone sharper. "You're not her real family, Laura," Clara said once, her voice cold over the phone. "You don't get to decide." I didn't argue. I just kept going, day after day, because Evelyn needed me. And maybe, in some way, I needed her too. She was my connection to Tom, to the life we'd planned but never got to live. Caring for her was my way of holding on. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, Evelyn whispered, "You're my family, Laura. Don't forget that." Her voice was frail, but her words carried a weight that made my chest ache. I smiled, brushing a strand of white hair from her face, and promised I wouldn't. That night, I drove home under a heavy sky, the stars hidden behind clouds. I didn't know then that everything was about to change, that the life I'd built around Evelyn's care was on the edge of unraveling. All I knew was the quiet rhythm of our days, the creak of her old house, and the promise I'd made to a man who was no longer here. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter from a lawyer. It arrived on a chilly October morning, addressed to Evelyn, but sent to Mark's address in California. I found it tucked under a stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the envelope crisp and official. My stomach twisted as I read it. It was a notice of intent to appraise the house, requested by Mark and Clara. They hadn't even bothered to tell me. I confronted them that evening over a tense phone call. "She's still alive," I said, my voice shaking. "This is her home. You can't just start carving it up." Mark's response was calm, almost rehearsed. "Laura, we're just planning ahead. Mom's not going to live forever, and we need to know our options." Clara chimed in, her tone sharper. "You've been living rent-free in her life. Laura, don't act like you're above this." Their words stung, but I swallowed my anger. I didn't want to upset Evelyn, who was already struggling with a bad cough that wouldn't go away. I hid the letter in a drawer and focused on keeping her comfortable. But the seed of doubt had been planted. For the first time, I wondered if I'd been naive to think I could protect her world from theirs. Evelyn's health took a sharp turn that winter. Her cough turned into pneumonia, and the doctor warned me that her heart couldn't take much more. I spent nights at her bedside, listening to the rattle of her breath, praying she'd pull through. She did, but she came home weaker. Her fire dimmed. I hired a full-time nurse, draining what little savings I had left. Mark and Clara didn't offer a dime. Instead, they started visiting more often, not to see their mother, but to check on the house. They'd walk through the rooms, eyeing the furniture, the paintings, the silverware. Clara once picked up a porcelain figurine, turning it over as if checking its price tag. "These are worth something," she muttered to Mark, who nodded, jotting notes on his phone. I wanted to scream, to throw them out, but I held my tongue for Evelyn's sake. She didn't need the stress. One afternoon, as I helped Evelyn sip her tea, she looked at me with a clarity I hadn't seen in months. "They're circling, aren't they?" she said, her voice low. I froze, unsure how to respond. She didn't wait for an answer. "I know my kids, Laura. They've always wanted what's mine, not me." Her words were heavy with resignation, but there was a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Don't let them take everything," she said. "Promise me." I promised, though I wasn't sure what I was promising to protect. The house. Her legacy. Something else entirely. I didn't know then that Evelyn had already taken steps to ensure her wishes would be heard. The visits from Mark and Clara grew more frequent, each one more invasive. They brought realtors, appraisers, even a lawyer once, all under the guise of helping Mom. I'd catch them whispering in the hallway, their voices low and conspiratorial. One evening, I overheard Clara say, "Once she's gone, we can sell this place and split it. Laura won't have a say." My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning for Evelyn's death, they were counting on it. I started locking the important documents, her will, her insurance papers, in a safe I bought with my own money. I didn't trust them not to lose something critical. But the more I tried to shield Evelyn, the more isolated I felt. Friends I'd once been close to had drifted away, unable to understand why I'd given up so much for a woman who wasn't even my mother. My own family, what little I had left, thought I was crazy for pouring my life into Evelyn's care. "She's not your responsibility," my sister told me over coffee one rare afternoon off. "Her kids should step up." But they didn't. And so I stayed, driven by a promise and a stubborn sense of duty. I didn't realize how much it was costing me until one night. After a particularly grueling day, I found myself crying in my car outside Evelyn's house. The weight of it all, the endless tasks, the hostility from Mark and Clara, the loneliness was crushing me. I loved Evelyn, but I was starting to lose myself. That night, Evelyn called me to her room. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were sharp. "Laura," she said, "you've given me more than my own blood ever did. Don't let them break you." She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "Keep this safe," she whispered, pressing it into my hand. "You'll know when to read it." I slipped the paper into my pocket, my heart pounding. I didn't open it, not then. It felt too heavy, too final. Instead, I tucked it into the safe with her other documents, promising myself I'd wait until she was ready to explain. But deep down, I knew she was preparing me for something her children would never understand. The next year was a blur of hospital visits and sleepless nights. Evelyn's heart was failing, and each day felt like borrowed time. I lived in a constant state of vigilance, checking her pulse, adjusting her pillows, and coaxing her to eat when her appetite faded. The nurse, a kind woman named Susan, became my lifeline, but even she couldn't ease the growing tension in the house. Mark and Clara's visits became more aggressive. They stopped pretending to care about Evelyn's health and focused entirely on the house. They'd show up unannounced, bringing strangers to measure rooms or inspect the foundation. One day, I caught Mark taking photos of Evelyn's jewelry box, his fingers lingering on her pearl necklace. "Just cataloging," he said when I confronted him, but his eyes avoided mine. I started to feel like a stranger in the place I'd called home for a decade. Every creak of the floorboards, every clink of Evelyn's teacup, reminded me of what was at stake. I wasn't just fighting for her comfort anymore, I was fighting for her dignity, her right to die in the home she loved. But the more I pushed back, the uglier it got. Clara cornered me one evening in the kitchen, her face tight with anger. "You're not her daughter, Laura. You're just the help. Stop acting like you own this place." Her words cut deeper than I expected, not because they were true, but because they echoed my own fears. I'd given everything to Evelyn, me time, my money, my heart, and yet, in the eyes of her children, I was nothing. I didn't tell Evelyn about the confrontation. She was too weak, her breath shallow and labored. Instead, I sat with her, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes, she'd murmur stories about Tom, how he'd loved building model planes, how he'd always wanted a big family. Each memory was a knife, reminding me of the life we'd lost. But it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't doing this for Mark or Clara. I was doing it for Tom, for Evelyn, for the promise I'd made. One night, after a particularly bad scare with Evelyn's heart, I sat in her living room, staring at the safe where I'd hidden her documents and that mysterious folded paper. I was tempted to open it, to see what secret she'd entrusted to me, but something held me back. It felt like betraying her, like admitting she wouldn't make it. Instead, I poured my energy into keeping her comfortable, filling the house with the smells of her favorite meals and the sound of her old records. But the pressure was building. Mark and Clara started talking about options for Evelyn nursing homes, assisted living facilities, places they could ship her off to so they could sell the house sooner. I fought them at every turn, citing Evelyn's wishes, her doctor's recommendations, anything to keep her where she belonged. They didn't listen. To them, I was an obstacle, a nuisance standing in the way of their payday. One afternoon, while Evelyn napped, I found a stack of papers on her dining table, real estate contracts, and signed but filled out with details about the house. My heart sank. They weren't even waiting for her to pass. They were planning to force her out. I confronted Mark that evening, my voice shaking with rage. "She's still here," I said. "How can you do this to your own mother?" He didn't flinch. "We're doing what's best for everyone," he said, his tone patronizing. "You'll thank us when this is over." I wanted to scream, to tell him he didn't deserve Evelyn's love. But I held back. I had to stay strong for her. That night, Evelyn woke me with a weak call from her room. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "They're going to take it all, Laura," she whispered. "Don't let them," I reassured her, stroking her hand. But inside, I was terrified. I didn't know how to stop them, how to protect her from her own children. The next morning, I found her weaker than ever, barely able to speak. The doctor came and went, his face grim. "It's time to prepare," he said softly. I nodded, my throat tight, and sat by her side, holding her hand as the hours ticked by. I didn't know it then, but those were her final days. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I knew that folded paper was waiting, ready to change everything. Evelyn passed on a quiet Tuesday morning, just as the first light of dawn crept through her bedroom window. I was there, holding her hand, her breaths growing softer until they stopped altogether. The room felt impossibly still, the weight of her absence pressing against my chest. I sat there for a long time, unable to move, unable to believe she was gone. I called Susan, the nurse, first. She came quickly, her face heavy with grief. Together, we prepared Evelyn's body, following the quiet rituals of death. I didn't call Mark or Clara right away. I needed time to say goodbye, to sit in the house that had been our shared world for so long. But eventually, I had to. Their response was curt, businesslike. "We'll be there tomorrow," Mark said. "Start packing her things." Their arrival was like a storm. They swept through the house, pulling open drawers, rifling through closets, claiming anything of value. Clara took the pearl necklace. Mark grabbed the silverware, and they both eyed the furniture like vultures. I watched, numb, as they dismantled Evelyn's life piece by piece. They didn't ask about her final moments, didn't want to hear the stories she'd told me in her last days. They only wanted what they could sell. I tried to stay out of their way, focusing on cleaning the kitchen, sorting her medications, anything to keep busy. But their presence was suffocating. They spoke about the house as if it were already theirs, discussing renovations and market values while I stood in the doorway, invisible. "We'll need to clear this place out fast," Clara said, glancing at me. "You can go home, Laura. We've got it from here." I didn't leave. I couldn't. Not yet. That night, alone in the guest room, I opened the safe. My hands trembled as I pulled out the folded paper Evelyn had given me. It was a letter, written in her shaky but deliberate handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed, the house silent around me, and began to read. Dear Laura, it began. You've been my daughter in every way that matters. My children have forgotten what family means. But you never did. I've watched you give everything to care for me. And I know it's cost you more than you'll ever say. This house, my things theory, not just objects. They're my life, my memories, my love for Tom. I want you to have them. Not Mark. Not Clara. You. My breath caught. The letter went on to detail her wishes. The house was to be mine, along with her savings and her most cherished possessions. She'd written it a year ago, when her mind was still clear, and had it notarized in secret. There was a copy with her lawyer. She wrote, and instructions to ensure her will was followed. Don't let them bully you. She ended. You're stronger than they'll ever know. I cried then, harder than I had in years. Not just for her loss, but for the trust she'd placed in me, the love she'd shown in her final act. I tucked the letter back into the safe, my resolve hardening. Mark and Clara could take what they wanted for now, but I had something they didn't. Evelyn's truth. The next day, they continued their plunder. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting. I called Evelyn's lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Thompson, who confirmed the letter's validity. She was very clear. He said, "The house is yours, Laura." She made sure of it. He promised to handle the legal side, but warned me it wouldn't be easy. Mark and Clara would fight, and they had resources I didn't. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope, a sense of purpose beyond survival. Evelyn had given me more than a house, given me her trust, her legacy. I wasn't going to let her down. As Mark and Clara loaded their cars with boxes of Evelyn's things, I stood in the doorway, the letter's words echoing in my mind. They thought they'd won, that they'd taken everything. But they didn't know about the letter, didn't know the fight that was coming. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Evelyn, for Tom, for the family we'd built in that creaky old house. The weeks after Evelyn's death were a battle I hadn't prepared for. Mark and Clara wasted no time. They hired a lawyer, contested the will, and claimed I'd manipulated Evelyn into changing it. She wasn't in her right mind, Clara told anyone who'd listen, her voice dripping with false concern. Laura took advantage of her. The accusation burned, but I held tight to the letter, to Evelyn's words. Mr. Thompson, Evelyn's lawyer, was a godsend. He walked me through the legal maze, explaining that Evelyn's will was airtight, updated it with witnesses, a notary, and a clear mind. The letter, while not legally binding, was a powerful testament to her intentions. She wanted you to have the house, he said. We'll make sure that happens. But the fight was brutal. Mark and Clara's lawyer painted me as an opportunist, a gold digger who'd wormed her way into an old woman's life. They dragged up my past, questioned my motives, even hinted I'd neglected Evelyn's care. I sat in court, my hands clenched, listening to lies that twisted my decade of sacrifice into something ugly. Friends I hadn't seen in years sent messages of support, but I felt alone, exposed, like the world was judging me for loving someone who wasn't mine by blood. The house stood empty during those months, its windows dark, its rooms silent. I couldn't bring myself to go back, not while the legal battle raged. Instead, I stayed in my tiny apartment, surrounded by memories of Evelyn, her favorite scarf. A photo of us laughing at her 85th birthday. The recipe card for her chicken noodle soup. Those small things kept me grounded. Reminded me why I was fighting. One evening, Susan, the nurse, came by with a box of Evelyn's things she'd found in the hospital. Inside was a journal, its pages filled with Evelyn's handwriting. I read it late into the night, tears streaming down my face. She'd written about my kindness, my patience, the way I'd made her feel loved when her own children had turned away. Laura is my family, she wrote. She's the daughter I never had. Those words gave me the strength to keep going. The court battle stretched on for months, draining my savings and my spirit. Mark and Clara had money, connections, and a ruthless determination to win. But I had something they didn't: Evelyn's truth. Her journal, her letter, her will. They all told the same story. She'd chosen me, not out of weakness, but out of love. One day, in the middle of a grueling deposition, Clara broke. She stood up, her face red, and shouted, she didn't deserve that house. She abandoned us. The room went silent. It was the first time she'd admitted what this was really about: not money, but resentment. They'd felt entitled to Evelyn's love, her legacy, but they'd done nothing to earn it. The judge ruled in my favor a week later. The house was mine, along with Evelyn's savings and her cherished possessions. Mark and Clara were left with nothing but the items they'd already taken. They didn't speak to me as they left the courtroom, their faces hard with anger. I didn't care. I'd won, not for myself, but for Evelyn. I moved into the house the next month. It felt strange at first, walking through rooms that still echoed with her presence. I kept her photos on the walls, her figurines on the shelves. I didn't want to erase her, I wanted to honor her. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life, inviting friends over, planting flowers in the garden, making the house my own while keeping her spirit alive. But there was one thing left to do. The letter, the one Evelyn had given me, still sat in the safe. I hadn't read it again since that first night. I wasn't sure I was ready. But one quiet evening, as the sun set over the Ohio hills, I took it out and read it one last time. Her words washed over me. A final gift from a woman who'd seen me when no one else did. The house was alive again, not with Evelyn's presence, but with the life I was building in her honor. I painted the walls a soft blue, her favorite color, and hung new curtains that let the sunlight spill in. The garden bloomed with roses and lavender, a tribute to her love of beauty. Friends came by, filling the rooms with laughter, something the house hadn't heard in years. It wasn't just a house, Anna Marie, it was home. I kept Evelyn's letter framed on the mantel, a reminder of her trust, her love. I didn't need to read it anymore. Its words were etched in my heart. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering how one woman's faith in me had changed everything. Mark and Clara never contacted me again. I heard through mutual friends that they'd sold Evelyn's things for far less than they'd hoped, their greed leaving them with little to show for it. I didn't gloat. I didn't hate them. I pitied them. In a way, they'd lost more than a house. They'd lost their mother. Long before she died, I started volunteering at a local senior center, helping others the way I'd helped Evelyn. It wasn't the same, but it felt right, like a continuation of her legacy. I'd tell stories about her to anyone who'd listen. Her stubbornness, her laughter, the way she'd loved Tom, and, in her own way, me. I wanted the world to know who she was, not as a frail old woman, but as a force of love and resilience. One spring morning, I found an old photo album in the attic, tucked behind a box of Tom's childhood toys. It was filled with pictures I'd never seen Evelyn and Tom laughing in the garden. Evelyn and her husband dancing at their wedding. Evelyn alone, smiling at the camera with a spark in her eyes. I sat on the floor, surrounded by dust and memories, and cried for the life she'd lived, the love she'd given. That afternoon, I invited Susan over for tea. We sat in the kitchen, the same one where I'd spent countless hours cooking for Evelyn, and I showed her the album. She was happy, Susan said, her voice soft. Because of you. I didn't know if that was true, but I wanted to believe it. As the years passed, the house became a place of healing. I hosted dinners, book clubs, even a small wedding for a friend's daughter. Each event felt like a gift to Evelyn, a way to keep her spirit alive. I never married again, never had children, but I wasn't alone. I had friends, purpose, and a home filled with love. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I thought about Tom. I wondered what he'd think of all this: the house, the fight, the life I'd built. I like to think he'd be proud, not just of me, but of his mother, who'd found a way to protect what mattered most. Evelyn's letter had given me more than a house. It had given me a second chance, a reminder that family isn't just blood, it's the people who see you, who choose you, who fight for you. I'd cared for her for 10 years, and in return, she'd given me a lifetime. I looked out at the garden, the roses swaying in the breeze, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The house was mine, but it would always be hers too. And as long as I lived here, I'd carry her with me, in every creak of the floorboards, every bloom in the garden, every memory we'd shared.